Guys. So tonight I want to get into something called the little season. It's going to be a little bit different from my normal stuff, and it's kind of fringy, but it's kind of sort of fun, but serious at the same time. It'll be on eschatology, and I'll get into more specific stuff about this in later episodes. So if you've ever been confused by the book of Revelation, I completely understand. And there are 1,000 different views out there, and plenty of people are absolutely convinced that theirs is the only correct one. And I'm not claiming that I have the market cornered on truth, but after years of reading eschatology, this view has become more compelling to me than any other view that I've encountered. It's moved from theory to a firm position that I hold, and I now so where we are in the timeline of Revelation is about what this is going to be on. So if you take a moment and picture a photograph from like the mid 1800s, like one of those black and white images of a city street lined with grand stone buildings, towering domes, and like intricate architecture that looks almost too precise and too advanced for the tools and time that we're told who built it. Maybe you've walked through an older part of your own hometown and noticed something odd. And that thing would be like basement windows and doorways sitting like half buried at sidewalk level, almost as if the ground itself was raised around the structures after they were already standing. And what I've come to believe from looking at events from just the past, I don't know, like 150 to possibly 350 years ago, is that we are living right now in the middle of what the Bible would call Satan's little season. It's the short but intense window of global deception that Scripture says follows a long period of peace and restraint. So if you've never heard this idea before, I get why it might sound far-fetched or like super weird, but stick with me because I'm gonna lay it out in a timeline per Revelation 19 and Revelation 20, exactly as it's written, no spin, just the sequence itself. And then I'll show you how I think the physical evidence from our recent past lines up with that timeline in ways that are genuinely difficult to explain any other way. And this isn't like ancient myth or distant future speculation. It's about things that happened in our grandparents, great grandparents' lifetimes, and the clues are still right here under our feet, and they're preserved in the old photos that we can still look at today. And so the Bible in Revelation chapter 19 and 20, gives us a very specific sequence of events. And at the end of history, first Jesus returns in power and glory. And he's described as a rider on a white horse with a sharp sword coming out of his mouth, defeating the forces of evil in one decisive blow. And right after that, the beast and the false prophet are captured and thrown alive into the lake of fire. Excuse me. And then an angel comes down from heaven and seizes Satan and binds him and locks him in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years, so he can no longer deceive the nations. And that binding kicks off the full millennium, the 1,000-year reign where Jesus and his people rule in real peace and righteousness. And during that time, the earth gets a genuine season of blessing. No Satan roaming free to stir up lies on a massive scale. No worldwide deception pulling entire nations off of course. And life advances under that righteous order. And the deceiver is completely out of commission. It does not mean that the period was absolute perfection. An example of this would be like that there was war in heaven at Christ's incarnation. But the overall atmosphere would have been one of unprecedented peace and unprecedented restraint upon evil. But once those full 1,000 years are completed, the Bible is very clear on this. It says that Satan gets released from his prison for a short time, specifically called a little season. And he immediately goes out to deceive the nations once again. And he then gathers them together for one final rebellion known as Gog and Magog. You've seen it in Revelation. So then fire comes out from heaven and then consumes the rebellion. Satan himself is thrown into the lake of fire, and then comes the final judgment. And the key thing that I keep coming back to is the timing of it all. So Satan's little season does not just appear out of nowhere. It only starts after the entire 1,000 years of peace and restraint have run their course. And during the millennium itself, large scale global deception like what we see today simply could not happen on this level because the deceiver is chained up and powerless to mislead the nations at large. To I guess to really see how the timeline works, we're going to have to look back at what Revelation describes happening before Jesus returns and Satan gets bound. Now, the book lays out a period of great tribulation filled with wars, judgments, plagues, massive destruction that prepares the way for Christ's return. And many of us who hold this position that believe that those tribulation events unfolded already in the past, giving us clear timestamps that set the stage for the millennium that followed. For instance, the Roman Jewish War from 66 to I think 73 AD, which ended with the complete destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. And this matches the kind of intense conflict, desolation, and as it says in the Bible, the abomination of desolation that Jesus himself warned about in the Gospels. Centuries later, the Great Plague, the Black Death, that swept across Europe and beyond in the mid 1300s. I mean, it killed like an estimated, it was almost 200 million people, and fits the pestilence bowl judgment in the book. And widespread death described in Revelation as part of the final troubles before the return. Now, these were not random disasters. They line up as the tribulation phase that cleared the ground, so to speak, before the 1,000 year period of peace and blessing began in Christ's reign. So look closer at the sequencing of the bowl judgments in Revelation 16, and the parallels become even more striking in my opinion. So the first bowl pours out like painful, festering like sores on those who had the mark of the beast, mirroring the horrific black bubonic plague, the ulcers, the boils. It killed so many people, and you have the second and third bowls that turn the sea and rivers into blood. And during the plague years, eyewitnesses chronicles they describe the rivers and coastal waters literally running red and with blood from mass graves, from rotting corpses. the they didn't have time to clean up the bodies. So you had the fourth bowl. It had fierce heat from the sun. The historical records show that there was extreme heat waves right after the outbreaks that caused crop failures, famines. So the fifth bowl brings thick darkness over the beast's kingdom. Entire nations were plunged into literal blackness. And the sixth bowl dries up the great Euphrates, the river, and it prepares the way for the kings from the east, and matches the collapse of old trade routes and empires during that time. And then finally, the seventh bowl. This unleashes a violent earthquake that was greater than any since humanity ever began. They had huge hailstones and seismic like earthquakes that absolutely devastating. They were widely reported across Europe and Asia. And now some also connect the resurrection and the rapture elements to spiritual fulfillments around that same broad window, and transitioning the world into the millennium under righteous rule. And Jesus himself made it very clear to his disciples that these things would happen soon, not in some distant future, thousands of years later. In Matthew 24, he told them, he said, truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all of these things have happened. And he also said in Matthew 16, he said, truly I tell you, for some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom, right? So Jesus loved these people deeply, and he was not speaking in vague metaphors or giving them false hope. He was telling them the truth, the return, the judgment, the tribulation events, and the transition into the millennium would take place within their lifetime and the lifetime of that generation. Now, once those pre-millennium troubles were finished, the binding of Satan could take place. So the earth entered that long era of real advancement and restraint upon evil. And a lot of us who have looked at the same evidence have come to the conclusion that the 1,000-year period of peace and advanced living actually took place sometime in the not too distant past. And this could maybe be a stretch of time that official history books have shortened. It's kind of speculative, but it's compelling. So like these things were quietly left out of books and records, and right around the 1700s, moving into the 1800s, that binding period ended. Satan was then set loose, and then the short season of deception kicked in full force. And the timing matches up to way too closely with the sudden changes that we can still see in architecture, photographs that are still available, and records to be too much of a coincidence. And to get the scope of how intense the little season has been, well, let's look at the major named conflicts that began from the 1700s through today. You had the Great Northern War. I'm looking at this thing for that. The War of the Spanish Succession. You have War of the Polish Succession, the War of the Austrian Succession, 7 Years' War, the Revolutionary War, the French Revolutionary Wars, the Napoleonic Wars, War of 1812, the Mexican American War, the Crimean War, Franco-Prussian War, the Spanish American War, and the Russo-Japanese War, World War One, World War Two, Korean War, the Vietnam War, Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, Iraq, the Russo-Ukrainian War. You have like hundreds of regional wars, smaller ones aren't even named. You had rebellions, colonial conflicts also broke out in the same window. And so guess how many people are estimated to have died from all of these conflicts combined. That number is around 400 million. And when you add in the deaths from disease, viruses, natural disasters, famines, and like everything else since the 1700s, the total catastrophic toll, it like jumps to an estimated 4 billion with a B. And that's an unbelievable level of death and just destruction packed into a relatively short period right after a supposed 1,000 years of peace. And so like let's walk through how these pieces are connected now. Like one by one, you had the magnificent old buildings that we still find in photos and some surviving structures. You had grand domes, towering spires, incredibly detailed stonework, and clever built-in features like advanced lightning protection. And these things point back to a time of real progress and blessing. If you look at old photographs from the mid 1800s and earlier, these cities often appear surprisingly empty, and they're incredibly advanced though, and they're very uniform in style. The architecture looks far too sophisticated and quickly built. That's the thing, to match what standard textbooks claim would be built with like 19th century hand tools, horses, and basic rudimentary factories. The scale, the precision across distant countries. It suggests a society that was operating at a higher level during a blessed, peaceful era under righteous rule. And this is exactly the kind of thing you would expect when Satan is kept from deceiving the nations on a global scale. And these were not primitive frontier towns slowly evolving as we would be taught. They look like impressive works that were left behind of a genuinely advanced orderly period, and then the troubles began. Okay, they line up exactly like the turning point when the 1,000 years ended and Satan was released. I mean, take 1871 for example. Like we all learned about the Great Chicago Fire, but on that exact same day, a cluster of other massive fires broke out almost simultaneously across the entire Great Lakes region. You had I think it's called Peshtigo Fire, that was in Wisconsin. It became the deadliest wildfire in American history, and it killed like almost 2,500 people. Now, fires also erupted in Holland, a place called Manistee, Port Huron, and several other Michigan towns. And these blazes even jumped across bodies of water under identical dry, windy conditions. And this was after a prolonged drought. So official history treats the Chicago fire rather an isolated event, which was famously caused by a cow kicking over a lantern. But records show too many fires starting at one time, and the same weather pattern for it to be just bad luck or coincidence. And they cleared away huge sections of old existing built of an existing built world in a sweeping wave. Now you layer on top of that the strange melting or flowing marks that are visible on the upper levels and fancy cornices of so many buildings and masonry that are from that era. Now these are not random cracks from age or ordinary fire damage. They look like sudden intense heat that cause the stone to soften and then drip. And then you have thick layers of mud and of dirt that buried lower floors and streets in city after city, where some researchers call this the mud events. Now, vintage photographs capture entire city blocks standing in deep mud that had to be dug out by hand. After which, the new higher ground became the accepted normal street level. And this wasn't like slow natural erosion. It appears as a quick, messy, widespread covering over that happened right around the same narrow window. And so, right alongside those events came the documented street, like they called it, the street raising projects that produced the half buried buildings that we can still see today, as I opened with. In Chicago in the 1850s through the 1870s, they had, and in other places also, they had in Seattle, Sacramento, Boston, and entire city blocks, including occupied buildings and even sidewalks, were lifted several feet using thousands of synchronizing what they called jack screws. And people kept living and working inside their homes and businesses while this massive operation went on. This is documented. The result is exactly what we walk past every day. Original ground floor, the windows were ground floor, and the doors are now sitting half buried at sidewalk level with full lower stories turned into basements. Now these aren't quirky, I don't know, like architectural choices. They're physical proof of a fast, coordinated burial and rebuild that overwrote whatever stood before. And immediately after these sort of upheavals, the cover up and rewriting kicked into high gear. And that is the clearest hallmark of Satan's little season in action. There was also something weird called the orphan train movement. And this ran from the 1850s to, I can't remember, but it relocated almost 200,000 orphans to new homes in the Midwest and in the West, to orphanages. It was marked as a charitable program for orphans, and yet many of those kids had parents that were listed simply as missing or deceased under unclear circumstances. More on that in a later episode. But these children grew up without strong family memories of the pre-trouble world, and then were funneled straight into brand new compulsory public school systems that spread rapidly in the 1800s and early 1900s. Now, these schools taught one consistent, simplified story: slow, steady human progress from primitive times to the modern age, with no mention whatsoever of major resets, cataclysms, or even lost advanced societies. A whole generation was effectively imprinted with the approved narrative before they could even question it, before they were even old enough to question it. Now, the World's Fairs of the late 1800s and the early 1900s, these followed the same pattern perfectly, and maybe one of the most glaring and controversial oversights, in my opinion, in modern history. Books books between roughly 1876 and 1915, dozens of massive international expositions were held across the United States and Europe, with standouts being the Chicago World's Fair. They called this the White City, and the Louisiana World's Fair. These events sprawled across, this is crazy, hundreds of acres, and featured colossal, ornate palaces and exhibition halls on a scale that defies easy explanation. The crown jewel in Chicago was the liberal arts building, and it was It was almost 31 acres under a single roof. It had the interior of it was like 44 acres. It's crazy. It was at the time the largest building ever erected on Earth, and this was large enough for 300,000 people to fit in, which is four times the size of the Roman Colosseum. In another one is St. Louis. Um, this one stretched to like 23 acres. Um, no major structure could match or approach that footprint. Now, official accounts insist that every one of these structures was nothing more than a temporary exhibition hall. This was like quickly erected in like 2 years using hired staff. Right. And it was said that they used merely cheap, fragile plaster like fiber and like wood mixture designed to imitate marble or stone, and then meant to last only for the length of the fair. But photographs and engineering records show that the buildings of breathtaking scale, they were precise, they were uniform, and it had an architectural sophistication that looked far too solid, too expertly engineered and professionally finished to have been thrown together happenstance, and quickly with the tools, labor, and technology of the era, that the level of detail and symmetry and, I mean, just monumental grandeur. Think of it. Look at the pictures. It simply does not match what textbooks claim was possible at the time. It looks instead like the remnants of a far more advanced society that was already in existence. Now, once the fairs closed, nearly every single one of these beautiful acre long building were rapidly demolished, and many by sudden convenient fires that swept through the grounds, or by controlled wrecking crews. And the sites were immediately cleared, regraded, and often covered up or turned into parks. Now, only a handful were spared and later rebuilt in permanent materials. It To me, it strongly appear that these expositions served as I mean, it was a brief global stage to showcase the grand remains of the previous blessed era. And it let millions of visitors marvel at them one final time before the physical evidence was systematically erased from the landscape. And then, of course, they were quietly scrubbed from the official historical narrative that we are taught in schools today. In the near in the near future, I'll do an entire episode just because this deserves it. I mean, just the topic alone, it's truly amazing. But anyway, like the later on, the wars of the 1900s added yet another layer of things being erased. I mean, they damaged and destroyed so many of the grand old structures across Europe and beyond. Now, through it all, new technologies, radio, movies, television, and now the internet have spread a single official narrative version of history to millions of people at once. And it makes it much harder for everyday people like me and you to compare notes or notice the inconsistencies. So, like, whenever odd photographs surface showing empty grand cities, right? Buried lower levels of unexplained melting on stone, the response from schools, media, and online platforms is almost always quick to dismiss or ridicule, instead of any real open investigation or consideration. And now, when you step back and add all of these things together, the advanced buildings from a seemingly blessed era, the sudden synchronized fire and heat damage, the widespread mud burials, the massive street raising operations, the orphan situation, and the reprogramming, the narrative, right? The world's fairs that showed and then hid evidence, the wars later that happened later on, and now the modern media control. It forms a pretty consistent, coherent, interlocking picture of Satan being loosed for the little season. And it's a relatively short but incredibly intense window, where the deceiver works on a massive coordinated scale. So the old blessed world gets burned, buried, or overwritten or whatever, and a new simplified timeline gets constructed right on top of the ruins. And entire generations are taught to accept the cleaned up story without ever noticing the clues that remain literally under our feet, and they are preserved in archived images if you look. So here's what makes the deception so convincing to those of us living right in the middle of it. If we were only, or excuse me, if we were truly being deceived on this scale right now, would we even know it? What would it look like? The late radio broadcaster Paul Harvey, loved him, once painted a picture that stuck with me. He said, imagine if Satan were running the show. He said, what would the world actually look like? People would still go to church on Sunday, and they would head to work on Monday. They would smile and laugh with their friends, and then cry at funerals, raise families, and carry on with everyday life. Everything would feel normal on the surface, but the thing is, Christ would not truly be at the center of it all. And that's the subtle genius of this little season. The deception does not announce itself with horns and chaos and all that stuff, a red tail. It lets normal life roll on, so we don't suspect a thing. While the real king is quietly pushed to the side and to the margins of our societies, our schools, media, and mainly in our churches. And today, that erasing happens faster and more completely than ever before. The internet and modern media can and does rewrite narratives in real time. They have biased algorithms and biased AI software that quietly shape what billions see and believe. And there are coordinated psyops, like the kind we all experienced during the global events of the early 2020s. Remember that? It demonstrates how quickly entire populations can be steered into fear, compliance, and forgetting the very memory of any prior blessed era that is scrubbed from the digital record as efficiently as the buildings under mud and regraded streets were. So we keep the outward forms of faith and civilization, but we lose the heart of it. You see what I'm saying? And most of us, uh, most realize never even realize the switch even happened. Uh, One question that keeps coming back to me as I look at the timeline is why God would release Satan for this little season, right? Why? What's the purpose? Right after a full 1,000 years of almost perfect righteous rule, like I'm not saying there wasn't anything negative that happened during the millennial reign of Christ. I'm saying because there was war, like I said, because there was war even in heaven in the book of Revelation at the incarnation of Christ. But the original scope of Christ's reign had to have been amazing. Now, I'm not dogmatic about this. Like I'm simply watching patterns and we see throughout the Bible and how spiritual entities have consistently behaved in the heavenly court and on earth. So think about the book of Job, where Satan, where he stands before Yahweh and the divine council and makes that public wager. Remember, he said, strip away the blessings, and even the righteous man Job will curse you to your face. Now we see the same courtroom dynamic. Oh, you have open accusation, desiring to plant doubt among the watching Elohim, and a direct challenge to the nature of true loyalty and God's high chair. And so that same pattern appears in the Babel rebellion, where the 70 Elohim were allotted the nations, and clear dissension arose over humanity's inheritance of the earth. That's Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 82. It shows up again in the war in heaven at Christ's incarnation, when the dragon stood ready to devour the child, and a third of the stars were swept to earth. I'm going to connect this. Just stay with me. Now, could it be that the millennium followed by Satan's little season is simply the cosmic scale version of that same behavior in Job? Now, the 1,000 years become God's undeniable public demonstration, right? This is what my rule actually produces when the deceiver is completely bound. You have peace, blessing, and order on a global scale. And then Satan is released for one final unrestricted run or turn, the ultimate cross examination, if you will, after humanity has already lived through the real thing. They will still choose the king when the accuser gets one. I mean, will they choose the king when the accuser gets one last chance to make his case? Now, this only makes sense if genuine free will is in play. Any kind of divine determinism or Calvinism, Reformed theology, whatever, would render the whole exercise pointless. Now, in this way, the entire sequence honors real chance or real choice while settling the question once and for all to the watching council and all of creation, so that when it finally falls and the verdict is carried out, no one in heaven or on earth can ever whisper that or say that the test wasn't fair or that loyalty was coerced. It's not just about us humans, it's about the whole of creation. And so, including our elder angelic brothers and possibly angelic sisters, I'm not sure. But we as humans are so myopic, and we think that God is the only king over the physical realm and not the spiritual realm also. He's king of both. And so he deals with both, and both have real implications on it. Like the spiritual realm has implications upon the physical realm has implications upon the spiritual, and then vice versa. Got it. And we have responsibility to Yahweh to remain faithful, and no matter what season we're in, whether it's Satan's little season or it's not, the command is still the same. Preach the gospel to all nations. So whether it's in your family, whether it's your work circle, your friend circle, your homeschool group, your public school, whatever, it doesn't matter. God's placed you He's put you in a place, and you are to be faithful in that place. You don't have to go over hell and creation in order to tell someone who doesn't know about Jesus. They're right next to us most of the time. So, like I said, like I'm not like 100% dogmatic on everything, but I see patterns as I said before, and it's interesting how things kind of lock in when you consider that maybe we're not waiting on tribulation to come. Maybe like what are the chances it has already happened? What are the chances that we are further along the timeline than we originally thought? I mean, we're always subject to echo chambers within church, within friend circles, but which echo chambers that when we're all in them, but like, how do you decipher which ones are correct and which ones are not? Of course, we would all say, well, whatever the scriptures say, but we would all be in agreement upon that. So then how do you decipher between categories about the timeline? Well, we have to look at the evidence, and there's more evidence for us being further along in the timeline. I mean, especially with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, that's a big one. I mean, the Romans reduced the temple down past the foundations and dug the foundations of the temple up so that it wouldn't be erected again. I mean, so anyway, but the echo chambers can be good and bad, because when we hear something new within our echo chamber, whatever it is, whether you're dispensationalist, pre-mill, a-mill, post-mill, it doesn't matter. The thing is like, if you hear something new, it may not actually be something new. It may be something new to you, but it may be an old idea that you haven't considered because it just sounds foreign and it sounds new. Well, don't be so closed off. Like I always say in almost every single video, we all have presuppositions, or like the glasses that we view things and interpret them through. We interpret life through a certain lens that we all have. But you have to be able to recognize, well, what lens am I using to interpret this Bible or to interpret that, or whatever the case may be. And if you can see, okay, I'm backpacking pre-beliefs onto the text, and then so then I'm getting a reinterpretation of what that context is actually saying, because I'm bringing my own ideas into the Bible. So if the text speaks on its own and it challenges you, is that a presupposition kind of a challenge, or is it a challenge because of lack of obedience, or because it's just a hard thing to understand? It could be all three. It could be all three at the same time. That's okay. God is patient, he's kind, and he teaches over time. He does not, God, like the Reformed camp and the Calvin, I love them, but man, and I used to be a Calvinist for 20 years, but man, that is some worm theology if there is any. I mean, how can you actually say that God determined me to believe a heresy and is going to let me stay in that heresy and still be good, right? So I'm going to be, so if I believe improper or wrong things about theology or whatever the case may be, or like I'm just laying out an example here. If I am actually a rank heretic, like, then if I'm a Calvinist, then I could say unequivocally that God purposed me and made me a heretic and made me to believe in false things, and then is going to punish me on Judgment Day for believing the false things. Like, I remember those pink elephants when I was a Calvinist, and I would just brush them to the side because I would just stick to the theology. I would stick to the 5 points. I would stick to Calvin. I would stick to Augustine, and I would just stay there. And I would not listen at all to any sort of other ideas about what I believed or what I should believe. As long if it didn't fit within Reformed theology, I wasn't hearing it. So, well, anyway, that was a rant. However, I'm just saying that just examine things with the logic and the sense that God gave you. Doesn't mean you can't be wrong. Like, doesn't mean that I can't be wrong. I'll be the first one to say I'm wrong. I could be wrong about this. As I'm saying, I could be wrong about the little season thing. But as far as the evidence goes, this is the most compelling view of eschatology or the end times that I've found. And hopefully we learn some more stuff as we go along. But anyway, I look forward to the comments. So I'm never going to tell you to like or subscribe. You're going to do that on your own. I hate that YouTube hook crap. So, like, especially, like, you ever notice, like, the opening of YouTube, any videos that open, it's always the same trope. They have the same sort of responses, like the same sort of like opening sequences where people say things just to get you locked in. If you're watching this, you were attracted to the title, and hopefully this, either you've heard this 1,000 times or you've never heard it at all. But like I said, I don't try to be cheap, and I don't try to, like, bait you in. Now, the AI pictures I use on the thumbnails, I admit sometimes I do that just because I think it's cool. But anyway, so I hope you're doing well. And with that, I'll say, may the Lord bless you, and may the Lord keep you. May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. And may the Lord lift up his countenance to you and grant you peace. Good night.